Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. The Pyramid of Meidum is said to be the oldest of the three pyramids built by King Sneferu, but I believe that the core of this pyramid was originally a finished step construction in its own right. I believe that Sneferu attempted to convert this step pyramid into a true pyramid, and I have also made a video in the past about my hypothesis that the bent pyramid is actually a converted Ziggurat-style building, and this is why it has its bent shape. I've linked this video below in the description. I believe that Sneferu renovated these much older constructions, but his work on the Pyramid of Meidum specifically was somewhat of a failure. No burial was ever discovered inside the Pyramid of Meidum, and the internal layout of this pyramid doesn't exactly scream that it's a tomb. I believe it had another function altogether, one that we can only speculate as to what it was. But to the northeast of the pyramid, just a few hundred yards away, there is a colossal structure in a ruinous state, known as Mastaba 17, or M17 for short. This mastaba is actually the second largest in the region, the first being Mastaba 16, which is the burial place of Sneferu's son Nefermat and his wife Atet. M16 has been enlarged twice, whilst M17, the second largest, was built in one go, with no subsequent coating or additions. But although slightly smaller, Mastaba 17 certainly occupies the most important position in relation to the Meidum pyramid. It is within the pyramid complex itself, whilst Mastaba 16 belongs to a grouping of mastabas some distance to the north. Furthermore, although larger, Mastaba 16 and all in the northern group are, as the great Flinders Petrie describes, very inferior in regards to the smoothness of the stones and the care of the stone laying. This is quite a strange paradox. Why would the great King Sneferu bury his son in a structure that is quite some distance from his so-called pyramid? And why would he build it in an inferior fashion to the one next to the pyramid? Would he not want to put the same care into Mastaba 16 as he apparently did with 17? And why not build his son's burial chamber closer to his pyramid? And then there are yet more problems. Egyptologists tell us that pyramids are tombs for the builder, but Sneferu apparently built three pyramids. First the Pyramid of Meidum, then the Bent Pyramid, and finally the Red Pyramid. He is of course only one man, so if we believe the official interpretation, why didn't Sneferu bury his sons inside his two unused pyramid tombs? Why leave them empty and instead build some comparably poorer structures in the north for his children? Why bother building Mastaba 17 in the first place? Why not just place the body inside the unused Pyramid of Meidum? The reason, I believe, is because pyramids were not originally tombs, and they were already there by the time Sneferu reigned. He renovated them, and I am sure he did not build them. So how does Mastaba 17 fit into all this? There is clear evidence that Mastaba 17 and the failed outer casing of the Meidum pyramid were built at the same time. This part of the pyramid's history, I believe, was its renovation, and not the final stage of one pyramid construction project as we are led to believe. M17 was a smoothly plastered brick construction, filled with clean limestone chips from the Meidum pyramid's renovation. Great care was taken with the mastaba, and it was as important, if not more important, than renovating the pyramid itself. It has precision stonework, with perfect walls built out of the uneven bedrock. In fact, there were perfectly cut bedrock walls that extended around the structure, seen most clearly at each of its four corners. Perfect L-shaped cuts, which still display maker's marks today. A finely laid pavement surrounds the mastaba, which was at least 4/4 of stone thick and perfectly flat. It was made of irregular slabs of limestone with very fine joints. There is no doubt that M17 was a special construction, the stone datable to the times of Sneferu, but its relationship to the actual burial chamber underneath is less straightforward. When Petrie first explored the mastaba in 1891, he found no way inside, and it was to be another 19 years until explorers forced an entry. By all accounts, the human remains were interred and then the tomb blocked with stone plugs before the mastaba was heaped up on top of it. Unlike most mastabas, the layout of the burial chamber shows there was never intended to be a communication between the chamber and the outside. There is a short sloping passage upwards from the chamber, only to stop short in a very small courtyard that was filled with loose stone from when the mastaba was built. Looking at the archaeology of M17, it is obvious that the burial chamber predates the mastaba, which was simply part of Sneferu's Meidum renovation project. But by how long? When Flinders Petrie did finally get inside the underlying chambers, he was disappointed to find that robbers had already entered and looted the tomb, with a robber's tunnel on the south wall of the north-south corridor. The breach is clear to see in Petrie's report. They had forced the lid off the huge granite sarcophagus and rolled it back on 2 masons' mallets. Petrie described, "It is the earliest private stone tomb known, and contains the oldest stone coffin. The chamber is far grander than that of the Pyramid of Sneferu." Prince Nefermat's chamber in M16 is paltry compared to the space provided in the chamber under Mastaba 17, and the quality of the internal stonework in M17 is far superior. Whoever the burial chamber was built for, they were clearly a very important person. So important that they were provided with a chamber grander than the pyramid itself, and so important that Sneferu honoured him with an incredible mastaba. Due to its close proximity to the pyramid, in my opinion, the important person is the one responsible for building the original step pyramid construction at Meidum. I'm sure the pyramid was not intended to be any sort of tomb, else the grand sarcophagus we find would have been placed inside the pyramid, and not in the ground close by, under what became Mastaba 17. The Pyramid of Meidum didn't even contain a sarcophagus, and it also had a crudely finished interior. I'm sure the pyramid was built with a function and purpose in mind, but what that function was is of course open to debate. So what do we know about the burial? Can it help us pin a date on the original step pyramid at Meidum? Well, the red granite sarcophagus is 3 times as thick as the one inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, whilst the length and height are the same. It weighs 8.5 tons with a 3.5 ton lid, and has fine workmanship worthy of a king. The accuracy of the flatness of the interior is no more than 0.025 of an inch, over a surface about 6 feet by 2 feet in size. The internal dimensions are slightly smaller than the Great Pyramids, but unlike the Great Pyramid granite sarcophagus, it did contain the remains of a man, but these remains are unusual to say the least. As well as the remains of a man, there were also the remains of a large bird, possibly a goose, as well as part of a skull of a much smaller bird, maybe a dove or a pigeon. The latter is likely to have entered the chamber with the tomb robbers, with the bone being grey instead of white. There was no wooden coffin inside, but grave goods included the remains of a small wooden box, a wooden mace and 2 crooks. The crooks were not bent round, but cut out of straight board, and one was painted yellow. They were 1 cubit in length. There was also a wood carving of the pendant tag of the kilt, 7.3 inches long, and also the knot, which was 4.4 inches long. Apart from this, the tomb was obviously looted, and the robbers, in their search for precious items, had broken up the body. Before the body was laid to rest, the remains had been defleshed and each bone was separately wrapped in linen bandages, before the body was put back together and the joints wrapped accordingly. The bandages were applied to the bones so thickly that the wrapped skeleton looked as though it still had flesh beneath the wrappings. But there was certainly no particle of flesh or skin anywhere between the wrappings and the bone, all except the skull. On its discovery, skin was still on the cheeks and the scalp, which had a considerable quantity of black or dark brown curly hair. This man is believed to have had an African origin. But the skin had been removed from the brow and around the eyes. The eyes had been replaced with balls of paste and the septum of the nose was still intact. It would have certainly been quite a sight. The explorer, Wainwright, measured key bones and estimates that the occupant was 1.72 metres tall, or 5 foot 6 inches. There are no detailed papers available on this kind of burial practice. Dismembering of bodies can be traced back to pre-dynastic times, and they stopped sometime in the 5th dynasty. But the process of individually wrapping bones and putting the body back together with false eyes in place and cut skin on the skull is unlike anything else seen in Egypt, and many believe it harks back to a forgotten age. So what happened to the body? Why can't we carbon date it? Well, after leaving the mastaba, the skull was mishandled and it disintegrated in transit. The complete skeleton was then sent to London and was apparently destroyed in the Blitz. As mentioned, the tomb was certainly robbed in antiquity, and apart from the body and grave goods, all that remained in the chambers in Petrie's time was scattered vases, several ox bones, copper axe heads, copper rods and chisels. Fragments of gold foil show that this must have been an important, possibly royal burial, but there are no carvings or inscriptions seen anywhere, just like in the Great Pyramid. There is no doubt that Mastaba 17 is a mystery. The official interpretation is that a 4th dynasty prince, another unknown son of Sneferu, died early, before Sneferu began work on the Pyramid of Meidum and the Mastaba. The prince was entombed with his possessions, and then the Mastaba structure was piled on top. We are told there was no need for a traditional shaft through the Mastaba into the chamber, as the body had already been laid to rest. But this just doesn't work for me. There are many large mastabas at Meidum and Dashur that we are told are for Sneferu's family, but they all pale in comparison to the completely unique Mastaba 17. Who would be deserving of such a burial, a chamber that was far grander than those inside the associated pyramids, and arguably any other structure from the old dynastic times? And if it was a prince that died early, why was the Mastaba so well constructed compared to the others? 100,000 tons of stones and chips were carefully laid to build this superstructure. Underneath was a finely constructed tomb, finished impeccably, bigger and better than any other structure at the time, including inside the Pyramid of Meidum. Whoever was buried beneath M17 was just as important in death as he was in life. I have no doubt that he was more important than a prince, and I believe he was responsible for Phase 1 of the pyramid, the stepped construction that rises out of the rubble at Meidum. The burial chamber under the Mastaba is certainly far older than the overlying structure, and the evidence points to a pre-dynastic date. In his paper on the subject, researcher Keith Hamilton highlights the fact that the natural rock is extremely close to the entrance of the tomb, with just enough room for a plugging block, and there isn't really enough room for a vertical access shaft. As there is no vertical shaft, no entrance through the Mastaba to get to the chamber, and no sign of one even being attempted to be built, plus the fact there is a small plastered courtyard at the start of the descending passageway, it is very clear that the burial chamber was never intended to be part of a Mastaba. They are two separate constructions, and the style of stonework shows they are from very different times. The burial chamber was made in a different era, one that didn't mark important tombs with large superstructures over the top. It was clearly meant to remain hidden underground, and this makes a lot of sense when you look around the Meidum landscape, as Petrie describes a further 3 Great Western tombs 200 metres west of the Meidum Pyramid. These subterranean chambers also have no superstructure over the top, and were clearly intended to remain hidden. They clearly hark back to a pre-dynastic era of history. So, to recap, I would argue that Sneferu renovated the Meidum Pyramid and tried to convert it into a true pyramid. He also built a grand mastaba over an incredible, important and ancient burial chamber within the grounds of the pyramid, maybe as a mark of respect, to honour this person in an even grander way than he honoured his own sons. This person must have been historically important to Egypt. Due to the close proximity of the burial chamber to the Meidum Pyramid and the fact they both predate the Sneferu renovations, I would suggest that dating the human remains in Mastaba 17 would have been the key to understanding the true age of the Egyptian pyramids, but sadly these remains are now lost to history. The burial practices and the body preparation are certainly unique in ancient Egypt, and I would offer a calculated guess that they are pre-dynastic in origin, but how far into antiquity it went, we will never know. In my opinion, this body is likely to be of noble status, maybe a king, but it cannot be Sneferu's father as some believe, as why would Sneferu build the mastaba if the tomb was never meant to be marked above ground? Surely he would honour his father's wishes for how he would want to be buried. The lack of overlying structure says to me that this person predates Sneferu by many, many generations. So just who is inside the tomb? When I started making this video, I thought it was the tomb of an unknown pre-dynastic king of Lower Egypt, but two finds within the sarcophagus confused me, that of a large bird and the fact there were two crooks, not a crook and a flail, which is more common in ancient Egypt. Being pre-dynastic, this person would have no association with the famous gods such as Osiris, Isis, Anubis or Horus, as they were a product of the Upper Egypt tribes of Naqada. So was there anything in pre-dynastic Lower Egyptian culture that could help us identify the person in this tomb? Well, in ancient Egyptian mythology, there is a god known as Anjeti. He was worshipped primarily in Lower Egypt, especially in the Nile Delta, and his importance goes all the way back to pre-dynastic times. He was the god who eventually became Osiris. He was known for draining the swamps of the Nile Delta and making them arable, but how he achieved this, we don't know. Before the prominence of Osiris, Anjeti was in charge of the underworld. He wore a headdress made from two crooks, but from the 4th dynasty, this had evolved into two feathers in artwork. He was also known as the bull or son of vultures, and if you compare the skull of a young vulture and a goose, well, they are in fact very similar in appearance. Osiris took over Anjeti's title and role as king of the earth, from the myth that Anjeti was a real earthly ruler. Osiris wasn't a physical being, but mythology says that Anjeti was. After his death, he was worshipped as a god, but to the indigenous people of Lower Egypt, he was once a living, breathing king. His worship became widespread across the north of Egypt, and he was so popular that the conquering Naqada III people had to merge him with their Osiris god. So, we have a god who is believed to have been a real king. He wore a headdress with two crooks and was associated with a large bird. And then we have the burial in Mastaba 17, a burial that predates Sneferu and is likely pre-dynastic, a burial more important than a prince, and to Sneferu, more important than his own children. The tomb was fit for a king, and although the body had been heavily disturbed, and the fact there was damage to the body, inside the sarcophagus was found two crooks, and also the remains of a large bird. Did King Sneferu actually find the tomb of a god? Is this why he built a mastaba greater than for his own children? Interestingly, the first pharaoh in Egyptian history who was depicted wearing the crown of Anjeti was none other than King Sneferu. And why? Well, maybe because he had in fact found the tomb of this god king. A king who became a god because maybe he was one of the original pyramid builders. The style of the internal chambers of Mastaba 17 rival the most ancient of ancient Egyptian architecture, and in terms of quality would not be out of place inside the Great Pyramid. In fact, the style of workmanship is very close. The tomb underneath Mastaba 17 and the human remains are arguably the most important finds in the history of ancient Egypt. Not only could they have dated the original step Pyramid of Meidum, but possibly the age of pyramid building in general, and they may actually be the remains of a king who became a god, who went on to become Osiris, the most important god in all Egypt. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.